Hey guys, how you going? Hope you're all doing very well. This evening I'm going to be doing another movie review. This movie is a horror film from New Zealand, English language, released in the year 2021, directed by James Ashcroft, and this film is called Coming Home in the Dark. So Coming Home in the Dark is about a family of four. You've got a mother, a father, and two teenage boys who have gone camping for the weekend to get away from their stressful lives. So they are trying to relax in the remote wilderness, but then they're interrupted by a duo of drifters who have taken them hostage. They don't know why they've been taken hostage, but they're about to embark on the road trip from hell. As they're weaving through the lonely highway in the evening, they're going to uncover some truth, so they're going to come to the surface. That's going to explain the motives behind these strangers. So what those motives are is something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on Coming Home in the Dark. This is a very simplistic film, but there's enough complexity to that simplicity to make it worth watching. And if you like films such as Wolf Creek, Killing Ground, Snowtown, and Hounds of Love, chances are you're going to really like Coming Home in the Dark. Now, this is a New Zealand horror film, but it does have the hallmarks of what makes modern Australian horror films so great, in that level of nastiness, the realism to the nastiness, the realism to the violence, and how nasty that violence is. And so when you have really nasty, realistic violence, you can't disconnect yourself in the caricature way. It's not like a Friday the 13th where it's got excessive gore. This is a movie that doesn't glorify the violence, but uses the violence in a very strong purpose. And that purpose is to create a character of suspense. And so that's what made Wolf Creek especially so good, is that the violence was so hard-hitting that you didn't want to see the characters succumb to the horrible fates, because you knew that it wasn't going to be pleasant to watch. It's very unflinching, very, very brutal. And this is what Coming Home in the Dark possesses, and it actually has what the biggest positive that has going for it, is that it wants to be a terrifying film, and it does strike you as a terror film through a very realistic way. You feel as though you could be in this situation. You can't disconnect yourself, because the horrible situations that are unfolding right before your eyes, you're never quite sure where this movie is going to take you because of that barbarity that the film possesses. There are moments where I felt as though no character was immune for the horrible things that were about to come to them. So what was going to happen? It always had me on a nice edge. I thought as though the way the story transpires is actually very riveting, is that there is a lot of there's a lot of questions that beg answering, and when the answers come, this is where the characters evolve. And your initial impression of each and every character is a lot different by the time the film finishes. So it's a roller coaster of emotions, and no one is ever who they seem. And so I felt as though it steers clear of the traditional black and white, cut out cardboard characters where it's good versus evil, and there's no in between. This is a film that just spins it right on its ear. And so it's a roller coaster. It actually feels like you're going through that road trip, and the road trip is basically the destination is the truth. And I thought as though it kept my interest from start to finish, and it did a very good job at maintaining that level of interest in the simple way that it tells its story. But the characters, it's almost like a stage play where the characters are evolving as the trip is getting further and further into the night. So it's a very beautiful film to look at. The picturesque environment, I thought, actually reminded me again of Wolf Creek, but it has a very unnerving undertone because of the score and the dreariness of the colouring. I thought as though, all right, something is wrong, something is off, and when pretty soon the situation starts to spiral out of control as this family are trying to fight for survival. So there are moments that I thought were very shocking. It took me off guard, and I like that. Basically, all bets are off. You're never quite sure who is going to die next. And if you don't have the predictability in the order of deaths, then ultimately you've got no control. And I didn't feel as though I had control. I felt as though I was one of these people in the car, and what these strangers were going to do, basically, they were at their mercy. And I feel as though the viewer is going to be at the mercy of James Ashcroft. As he's telling this story, it just gets darker and darker, and I just felt as though it emulated a lot of what made modern horror in Australia so great, is that nastiness to the sense of realism that the film produces. And so it's a movie that doesn't go for too long, and I really liked the characters involved. I liked the drifters. I thought they were very, very mysterious, and there's a story beneath everything that keeps it going. And so when you start to realize what's going on, then all of a sudden your sympathies are basically with everybody. It's just a situation that has got out of control, and it shows that sometimes your past can really catch up to you. And so I thought all that was absolutely fantastic. The acting performances were great. There's a very simplistic sort of script, but I thought as though the characters and the actors really handled that very well to create a strong sense, as I said, of realism, of almost a documentation of a horrible event, as opposed to its Friday the 13th caricature bloodbath. And so all that was very good. The soundtrack was fantastic, and it was just a very haunting and very, very dark experience. It's a brutal film, but it just has that cruelty that Wolf Creek had. So if you like those kinds of films, Coming Home in the Dark is definitely for you. So it's a very very competently made film. But unfortunately, there were some issues to this movie that prevented me from loving it as much as Wolf Creek and Killing Ground especially. And the reason why I didn't love it as much as those films is because it didn't have the patience of those movies. Now, Wolf Creek, very simplistic, but it gave you enough a chance to get to know these characters. You actually felt like, okay, these could be your friend, it could be your acquaintance. And so when the violence is happening, it's even more hard-hitting. But in this movie, I felt as though we didn't get to know the family enough before the horrible things start to happen. So I never felt totally connected to these people. And so that sense of nastiness in the realism, I didn't feel as though it was as hard-hitting as those other films that I just mentioned, because I never felt that strong connections, because before you know it, you're put into the horrible situation as opposed to actually getting to know these people, and that slow burn quality of getting into something really bad, that sense of anticipation, you don't get the opportunity to do that because it's already in there before you know it. And I thought as though the end of the last quarter of the movie was somewhat predictable, and it does go down a somewhat traditional sort of generic storytelling as far as horror is concerned, but the majority of this film, it's very dark, very nasty, and I felt as though the evolution of the story kept me on edge, and I never felt as though this is going to have a happy conclusion. And so it's very downbeat and depressing. If you like your really cruel horror films, Coming Home in the Dark is one I would recommend. It's not perfect, but it's certainly better than a lot of recent horror films in world cinema recently. So if it sounds like your kind of thing, go out there and see. I'm going to give this film 3.5 stars. All right, guys, that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep watching movies, and I'll see you later.